Good morning and welcome to the Grim. I'm your host, Kristen. On today's episode, we'll be opening the gate and entering the Friedhof Ohlsdorf, located in Hamburg, Germany. So grab your favorite mug, cozy up, and let's take a dig into history. I think being passionate about cemeteries often leads others to assume you're obsessed with death. In a way, all humans are. Death is inevitable, and we're drawn to what we cannot escape. But for many of us, the fascination isn't with death itself. It's with the history buried within it, the story sealed behind iron gates. Ohlsdorf is a paradox in this sense. People enter its gates for reasons beyond mourning, yet despite being a cemetery, it hardly feels like one. It's a place where memory, beauty, and life quietly coexist with loss. As one of the world's largest cemeteries and widely considered one of the most beautiful, Ohlsdorf effortlessly deceives the eye. Its vast grounds unfold like a botanical garden or sculpture park, complete with bus stops, benches, and winding footpaths. Many visitors unexpectedly stumble upon a gravestone or mausoleum. Pause in confusion. Where am I? This isn't how death is supposed to feel. Ohlsdorf is so expansive it defies casual visitation. At 391 hectares or 966 acres, it would take nearly a week to fully explore, or possibly more. It's one of the rare burial grounds where even middling reviews sound enchanted. Some who give it just 2 or 3 stars still write with awe, as if struggling to comprehend the quiet grandeur they've witnessed. It's a reminder that no review can truly capture the soul of a place, and even beauty can leave people unsettled. Founded in 1877 just beyond the edge of Hamburg, Ohlsdorf Cemetery was intended as a non-denominational haven, a place where all faiths and walks of life could find rest. But what took shape was something far more immense, a city of the dead so vast it mirrors the living metropolis beside it. Over 50 species of towering deciduous trees and conifers rise through its landscape, their branches casting shifting shadows over weathered graves. Still ponds reflect the sky while brooks murmur through the undergrowth, alive with waterfowl. Kingfishers, bright and elusive, dart like spirits between boughs. Long-eared and tawny owls glide silently overhead, their wings brushing against the hush of stone and soil below. 17 kilometers of winding roads and woodland paths snake through the grounds, open to cars, bicycles, and wandering souls. Even city buses, lines 170 and 270, pass beneath its canopy, rolling past sculpted mausoleums and springtime rhododendrons that bloom in brilliant defiance of death. Beneath those blooms lie not only graves, but stories of poets, painters, and politicians, their everyday lives now folded into silence. In Ohlsdorf, every step is a quiet crossing between beauty, memory, and the eternal. Each year, 2 million visitors pass through its gates, drawn by its funerary art, its hauntingly beautiful mausoleums, or simply the quiet pull of a garden shaped by grief. Even now, nearly half of Hamburg's burials happen within Ohlsdorf's borders. In 2002 alone, the cemetery welcomed 1,600 bodies and 4,300 urns into its care. To tend to this garden of shadows, over 200 gardeners work year-round. They're not just caretakers, but curators of memory, preserving the stillness, trimming the silence, and keeping watch over a place where the past is never quite buried, only patiently waiting. Tucked beyond Chapel 12 in this endless sprawl of Ohlsdorf lies a sacred corner steeped in silence and sorrow, the Hamburg Commonwealth War Graves Commission Cemetery. One of only 4 permanent Commonwealth cemeteries in Germany, it feels less like a plot of land and more like a hush, an enduring echo of wars that scarred the world. Here rest over 2,400 identified casualties, British Commonwealth and Allied servicemen from both World Wars. Some were prisoners who perished behind enemy lines during the Great War. Others were sailors whose bodies were carried by the sea, washed ashore on the wind-lashed Frisian Islands. In 1923, as the world tried to make sense of its wounds, a decision was made. The graves of the Commonwealth soldiers scattered across Germany would be gathered into 4 sanctuaries. Ohlsdorf was chosen to become one of them. What followed was a quiet migration of the dead. Remains were exhumed from 120 burial grounds across Schleswig-Holstein, Mecklenburg, Oldenburg, Hanover, Saxony, Brunswick, and Westphalia. Many died in captivity far from home. A few were never found but never forgotten. Their names are inscribed in stone, including 3 lost in Partstrom whose graves could not be located. And then there are the nameless, 25 unidentified sailors whose bones were recovered when the HM submarine E-24, sunk by a mine off Heligoland in 1916, was raised from the sea's depth in 1974. The war was long over, but even then the sea had not let them go. Today, 708 servicemen from the First World War lie in the Commonwealth plot, some known, others only remembered. But the silence does not end there. The Second World War left deeper shadows, airmen lost during bombing raids, soldiers who died with the occupying forces, and all 1,466 servicemen of the Second World War were buried here. Alongside them, 378 post-war graves and 14 war graves of other nationalities rest in quiet formation. Even after the guns fell silent, the earth kept receiving the dead. The spirit of Ohlsdorf is not just a burial ground, it's a gathering of ghosts. Each stone a name, each name a story cut short. Here, far from their homelands, the Commonwealth dead lie beneath foreign trees, wrapped in foreign soil. But in this place, memory does not fade. It lingers in the hush between the graves, in the soft shuffle of the leaves, and the watchful quiet of the grim. But the Commonwealth plot is only a chapter of Ohlsdorf's vast, uneasy anthology of remembrance. Deeper still, in the heart of the cemetery, lies another realm, the German soldiers' graves complex. This is not a place of simple reverence, but of sorrow and something deeper, shame. Over 3,400 German soldiers from the First World War are buried here, many having died in Hamburg's hospitals. Among them are 61 revolutionaries who perished in the political upheavals between 1918 and 1920. More than 3,000 additional graves were added in the aftermath of the Second World War. Soldiers, members of the abhorrent Nazi regime, and others caught in the machinery of the regime crumbling into ruin. But numbers cannot carry the weight of what lies beneath this soil. Their graves, controversial in many ways, leave a distinct feeling with visitors, usually grimmer of the sort. In the summer of 1943, Hamburg burned. The Allied air raids, known grimly as Operation Gomorrah, descended with calculated fury, turning the city into a furnace of death. In just days, entire districts were reduced to ash. More than 37,000 lives were extinguished in a firestorm. Men, women, children, most of them incinerated beyond recognition. What followed was a second horror, one few speak of. The bodies had to be retrieved. It was not medics or mourners who were sent into the ruins. It was prisoners from the Neuengamme concentration camp who were forced into the smothering rubble. They pulled charred remains from twisted metal, from collapsed homes, from fire-blackened cellars, and when the death toll became too great to count, they were made to dig a grave, a vast cross-shaped trench in Ohlsdorf Cemetery, its arms stretching hundreds of meters, a wound in the earth to hold the city's pain and twisted it in the complexity of controversy. And then came the ferryman. On August 16, 1952, a monument was placed at the center of the mass grave. At its heart stands a sculpture, Passage Across the Styx, carved by Gerhard Marx. Here Charon, the mythic boatman of the dead, carries his passengers, a bride and groom, a mother carrying a child, an old man, and a lone figure lost in thought. All ages, all fates, all lost. It's not a war memorial in the traditional sense, it's a freeze frame of mass death, unflinching in its stillness. Around it stands 18 oak beams, etched with the names of the city's districts, the places where the fire fell, where lives were unmade. A panel nearby notes the number 36,918, but numbers are cold. The earth beneath it holds the heat that statistics cannot explain. Along the perimeter of this grim expanse lie scattered gravestones, small personal markers marked by grieving families in the years after the war, A name here, a date there. Proof that someone remembered, someone searched for the lost and refused to let them vanish completely. And yet, even remembrance can stir discomfort. Since its dedication, the monument has drawn controversy. Some say it turned mass death into mythology, portraying the destruction as a tragic inevitability rather than a consequence of the Nazist regime's brutal ambition. The fire fell from the sky, yes, but it was summoned by the choices made long before the first bomb dropped. Still, the dead remain, buried beneath the oak beams, beneath the sandstone monument, beneath the sculpture of the Eternal Crossing. They wait. But war didn't only kill soldiers. Beginning in the 1950s, as graves were moved and reinterred, 1,000 victims of Nazi tyranny were laid to rest here, granted eternal rest under the German federal graves law. These were the silenced, resistance fighters executed by the Nazi regime, Jewish POWs from the Soviet Union, concentration camp victims, children of enslaved laborers, and those murdered under the so-called euthanasia program. Their graves lie alongside fallen soldiers, uneasy neighbors in death, raising questions with no easy answers. In 1953, a rotunda was built and consecrated as the monument to the fallen of World War II, where wreaths were laid in solemn ritual on Germany's National Day of Mourning. Yet for decades, the monument only commemorated soldiers, ignoring the others, the victims who did not wear uniforms. That silence, too, was eventually challenged. Voices rose to demand the acknowledgement of the Wehrmacht deserters, executed for treason, buried with the very men they refused to follow. In 2012, the German War Graves Commission convened a round table, a coalition of historians, educators, resistance memorial groups, and cemetery stewards. Their goal, to examine how Ohlsdorf remembers. Their first step was a quiet one but symbolic, renaming the Soldiers Avenue honor to Ida Eli after a Jewish actress and resistance figure. In 2021, they published Soldier, Forced Laborer, Deserter, a book unearthing the stories buried beneath sanitized inscriptions. Informational panels followed truth etched into metal, where silence had stood for far too long. But Ulfstar's remembrance doesn't end at a single monument or rotunda. Scattered throughout the grounds are 6 distinct memorials to the victims of Nazi persecution. Across from the crematorium stands the monument for the victims of Nazi persecution, erected in 1941. A solemn stele bears the names of 25 concentration camps, and around it lies urns, 105 above the ground and 29 buried, filled with ash and camp soil gathered during the week-long remembrance in 1945. Elsewhere in the memorial grove, the Hamburg resistance fighters cradles the remains of 55 anti-fascists, many executed or lost in custody. A bronze sculpture by Richard Steffen watches over them. Carved into a bordering wall are the final words of Czech resistance journalist Julius Fučík. "Mankind, we love you, be vigilant." In the Garden of Women, the memory spiral honors female victims and opponents of the Nazi regime. And just beyond the cemetery's bounds, in the Jewish cemetery nearby, stands the monument for the murdered Hamburg Jews, raised in 1951. These stones don't speak loudly, but they speak in forms of remembrance and grow louder with each visitor who remembers their victims beyond death. Together they whisper of wars fought, lives erased, histories revised and reclaimed. They mark where grief becomes legacy, where silence becomes responsibility, and in Ohlsdorf, among the dead and the remembered, the grim walk slowly, listening and learning, hoping you will too. Tucked within the heart of Ohlsdorf's winding grounds lies a building not marked by mourning, but by memory, the Museum Friedhof Ohlsdorf. Established in 1996 by the Freundeskreis Ohlsdorfer Friedhof, a society who refused to let the cemetery stories fade. This museum stands freely open to all those who wander through its gates. It's more than a museum, though. It's a threshold, part archive, part altar. Inside, the tools of burial and remembrance are carefully preserved. Antique maps that have once guided mourners, iron tools worn by time and touch, urns once cradled by grief, and tombstones salvaged from the cemetery's earliest days. Some so eroded that the names have slipped away entirely, as if the dead had begun to reclaim their own silence. Ohlsdorf was Germany's first American style park cemetery, opened in 1877 not just to bury the dead, but to reimagine how we live alongside them. And this museum tells that story of mourning as a culture, of ritual as history, of how funerary customs have evolved through the eras of empire, war, and reconciliation. But perhaps what is unsettling is what lies between the exhibits, the quiet gaps, the unspoken truths, and the things we choose not to preserve. From the stillness of these rooms, among the displays of mourning veils, chisels, dulled by the use of time, the past doesn't rest, it lingers, waiting to be remembered or worse, forgotten, through epithets etched in stone, through the statues that seem to watch, through the lives that once burned brightly and now smolder beneath the soil. These are their stories, not just in death, but of the strange, stubborn persistence of life. The air in Rembrandt was thick with coal smoke and the clang of industry, a place where brick tenements stood shoulder to shoulder like weary soldiers, and the sky often seemed the color of iron. It was here in 1918, as the last cannons of the Great War fell silent, that Helmut Schmidt drew his first breath, a child born between the ashes of one world and the uneasy birth of another. Statesman, soldier, smoker, scholar, a man forged by firestorms and philosophy. Helmut Schmidt's story begins not in the corridors of power, but in the streets of Brembeck, a working-class district of Hamburg where war was not yet a memory, but a future waiting to ignite. He came of age in a world unraveling. As a young man, Schmidt marched beneath the banners of the Hitler Youth, though not without resistance. His political instincts, sharp even then, were often at odds with the regime. Yet history, like fire, leaves no one untouched. He served in the Luftwaffe, witnessed the siege of Leningrad, and stood, a grim observer at the People's Court, as Judge Roland Freisler justly issued death sentences like curses. Schmidt would later recall the stench of burnt flesh, the sound of villages falling, and the unspoken knowledge that something monstrous was underway. But in those years, silence was the armor of survival, and Schmidt's involvement, though shadowed by controversy, was never carved in certainty. After the guns fell silent, Schmidt emerged not as a ghost, but as a builder. He joined the Social Democratic Party and carved his way through the political ruins of post-war Germany, not with charisma, but with calculation. He was a man of logic, of numbers, of exactitude. Where others spoke of ideals, Schmidt reached for blueprints. In 1962, Hamburg drowned beneath a flood, and Schmidt took command, not by invitation, but by necessity. "I wasn't put in charge, I took charge," he later said, summoning troops and federal power with no legal authority, saving thousands. In the city of water, he became steel. By 1974, he had risen to the highest office, Chancellor of West Germany, following the resignation of Willy Brandt. Schmidt was no dreamer, he was a guardian. Cold-eyed and unflinching, he guided the nation through economic crisis, RAF terror, and the Cold War tremors. When a Lufthansa plane was hijacked by Palestinian militants in 1977, Schmidt gave the order: breach the plane, kill the terrorists, save the hostages. It worked, but each decision carved a scar. His vision stretched far beyond Germany's borders. Alongside France, he laid the foundations for the European Monetary Union and helped birth the Group of Seven. In his later years, Schmidt walked a more controversial path. He opposed multiculturalism, feared digital chaos, and dismissed the hysteria of climate change debates. He spoke defiantly through interviews and parliament sessions alike, as though daring death to reach for him one more time, which it didn't for a while until it did. When Loki, his wife of 68 years, passed in 2010, something changed in him. A new partner emerged, Ruth Loa, but grief never left him. A man who led a nation, outlived enemies, and silenced disasters, became quiet. Not small, just quieter. He died at home in Hamburg in 2015 at the age of 96, the longest-lived chancellor in German history. A state funeral was held in St. Michael's Church. His coffin, wrapped in the German flag, was carried through the streets by soldiers in ceremonial precision. His body was laid to rest in Ohlsdorf Cemetery, beside his wife Loki, beneath the shade of trees he once saved in flood and fire. To visit the grave of Carl Hagenbeck is to confront a legacy as exotic as it is uneasy. The father of the modern zoo, Hagenbeck dreamed of tearing down bars and walls, replacing them with open enclosures where animals could roam, watch from afar. But his vision did not end with beasts. He staged human zoos, exhibiting indigenous people from colonized lands for European crowds, merchant of marvels or trafficker of spectacle. His grave sits peacefully beneath a canopy of leaves, yet the creatures of his past, the lions, the elephants, the exploited, still prowl through history. Some graves are watched over by angels, his may be watched over by something else. Some souls seem to be born with the echo of war already in their bones. Long before the bombs fell, before the blood-soaked cobblestones in the buildings burned hollow, the world was already preparing its tragedies and a voice to remember them. Born in Hamburg in 1921, beneath the skies already bruised with the omens of war, a child entered the world. One fated not just to witness its ruin, but to give its voice to its silence. Wolfgang Borchart's life was brief, brilliant, and brutal. The only son of liberal parents, his mother a poet, his father a teacher and a Dadaist. He came of age under the crushing heel of a rising Reich. Even as a teenager, Borchardt resisted. He loathed the Hitler Youth and penned poems that whispered defiance. But resistance has its price. Arrested by the Gestapo in 1940, and again during his conscription, he was battered by frostbite, hepatitis, and accusations of self-mutilation. His body broke, but his voice did not. What followed was a descent into hell. Drafted into the Wehrmacht and thrust into the frozen wastelands of the Eastern Front, Borchardt saw what most could not speak of. He returned without a finger and worse, without illusions. In 1944, for mocking Goebbels to fellow soldiers, he was imprisoned again, then sent back to war. When the Third Reich fell, he walked nearly 600 kilometers, or around 370 miles, back to Hamburg, on foot, alone and ill. But the war wasn't just finished with him yet. Even if the war was over, it had taken his health, now it claimed his time. Borchardt was dying, his liver failing fast, but doctors only told his mother, hoping it would help his last weeks. And so he wrote feverishly and furiously, as if words could stop death unknowingly. And in 1947, just months before he succumbed to liver failure in a Swiss sanatorium, he unleashed his most haunting work, known in English as The Man Outside, a tragedy of a soldier returned to a home that no longer exists, if it ever did. Borchardt's prose became scorched earth literature, or what Germans came to call Trümmer literature, or rubble writing. It didn't name its ghosts, it made you feel them. There were no heroes in his stories, only men shaped by mud, silence, and shame. In The Kitchen Clock, a broken timepiece stands for a man's lost world. In The Man Outside, God himself is put on trial by a veteran asking why, giving readers a pause to think that if he had lived longer, what else could he have penned to creation? But he also gave the world a look into Germans against Nazis, disgusted with their country and willing to speak out regardless of the consequences, unsilenced. He died at 26 years old, having already said everything. Today in Ohlsdorf Cemetery, his grave rests like a quiet stage. But make no mistake, his words still walk, his sentences still shout, and in the haunted corridors of a post-war memory, Wolfgang Borchardt's words are still very much alive today. In every great port city, there's ghosts, not just of sailors and lost ships, but of the men who moved empires with tides and timetables. Some vanish quietly, their legacies fading like salt in the air. Others, like Albert Ballin, leave deeper wakes. His was a name once whispered in the same breath as oceans, until the waters turned cold and history turned cruel. Albert Ballin was a man who built empires on water and watched them slip beneath it. But while his ship still ruled the oceans, Ballin himself was never fully embraced by the society he served. A Jew without a title and an empire obsessed with both, he remained an outsider. Even as he dined with emperors and built ships for kings, it was Ballin who reimagined sea travel, not as a means to an end, but as a destination itself. In 1891, he transformed the Augusta Victoria from a transatlantic liner into a floating palace. launching the first luxury cruise into the Mediterranean. His rivals scoffed, then they followed. From that moment on, leisure and the sea became inseparable because Ballin dared to make the journey the jewel, not the shore. But for all his vision, Ballin could not calm the tides of war. He watched with mounting dread as the world plunged into chaos, and his beloved ships were no longer claimed by the waves, but by governments and treaties. When the Kaiser, his ally and shield, abdicated in the final days of World War I, Ballin saw the writing on the wall. His empire, like so many others, was sinking. On November 9th, 1918, just 2 days before the war's end, Ballin slipped away quietly in his Hamburg home, his death shrouded in morphine and sorrow. Today he lies beneath the stones of Ohlsdorf Cemetery, beneath the soil of the very city he helped build yet never fully belonged to. His grave is modest, his legacy is vast. Every cruise ship that glides over calm waters sails, in part on the ghost of Albert Ballin's dreams. In life, Hendrik Hertz chased whispers, not voices, not echoes, but the invisible ripples that move through the air, through space, through us. He was the man who proved that James Clerk Maxwell was right. The electricity and magnetism, dancing together, could cast waves across the void. Waves we cannot see, waves we call radio. And yet Hertz never lived to hear what he discovered. Born in Hamburg into a cultured Hasidic family, he was brilliant from the beginning. He mastered Arabic as easily as he mastered equations. He studied under Helmholtz and Kirchhoff, names that now live in textbooks, but in Hertz's time, walking the same echoing halls. In the laboratories of Berlin, Kiel, and Karlsruhe, Hertz coats electromagnetic waves from coils, sparks, and shadows. His instruments were primitive, arcs of copper, zinc spears, and spark gaps. But what he conjured was profound. He proved that light itself was the only part of a broader spectrum, a secret symphony of energies humming through the air. He called them Hertzian waves. We call them today radio. Between 1886 and 1889, he revealed a universe of invisible movement, reflective waves, polarized waves, and refracted waves. He measured their speed, he mapped their shape. And yet when asked what use his discovery might serve, Hertz famously replied, "Nothing, I guess." He was a man of theory, not of consequence. He saw the wires, but not the world they would connect. He died before Marconi's first transmission, before television, radar, or the static of distant stars carried into our homes. He died at just 36 years old. Illness struck swiftly, migraines turned into infection, a disease now some suspect was a malignant bone condition. Surgeries followed, but nothing could stop the quiet unraveling. On New Year's Day, 1891 in Bonn, he slipped away, leaving behind a wife, 2 daughters, and a legacy that would outlive empires. Today, Hertz lies buried in Ohlsdorf Cemetery, beneath a name the Nazis later tried to erase. Though his family had converted to Lutheranism long before his birth, they could not escape the regime's brutal taxonomy. Streets bearing his name were renamed. There were even whispers of renaming the very unit of frequency, Hertz, after someone more racially acceptable. But science, like memory, has a way of resisting silence. His daughter sadly never married. His bloodline faded, but his influence did not. Every frequency we measure, every broadcast we send, every signal pulled from the ether carries his name, Hertz, the man who proved that emptiness is never truly empty. There's a quiet around his grave in Ohlsdorf, not the silence of death, but the hum of something just beyond hearing, an unseen pulse, a wave caught forever between transmission and reception. The Grim doesn't speak in megahertz, but we proudly send this podcast in hertz, remembering his legacy. In the long shadow of his uncle, the famed Hendrik Hertz, who gave voice to the invisible, Gustav Hertz stepped into the unknown with electrons and atoms at his command. In 1925, he and James Franck captured the Nobel Prize for unraveling what happens when an electron collides with an atom, secrets pried from the tiniest of tombs. But the story of Gustav Hertz is not clean, linear, or free of ghosts. Born in Hamburg, educated in the gilded lecture halls of Göttingen and Berlin, he rose quickly through science ranks. In the calm before the First World War, he and Franck conducted the now legendary experiments that would rewrite atomic theory. But when war came, he traded equations for a uniform and joined the infamous Fritz Hauberg's gas warfare unit, unleashing chlorine clouds upon enemy trenches. Science then was a blade, and Hertz learned to wield it. Twice in his life, he was driven from his post, not by failure, but by blood. In 1934, despite a military background and towering intellect, he was forced to resign as a director of the Physics Institute in Berlin. His crime, a sliver of Jewish ancestry. Even geniuses were not spared when history sharpens its knives. He fled to Siemens, then to secrecy, and then the war's final hours, he vanished into the East. In 1945, as Berlin fell and silence swallowed the Reich, Hertz was among four scientists who made a pact to surrender not to the Americans, but to the Soviets. And so, with unarmored escort and a quiet promise, he was taken not as prisoner, but as an asset, the brain behind the bomb, the man who would help the USSR chase the atom's explosive heart. Deep in the Georgian resort town of Akaseri, Hertz became the head of Institute G, a secret facility dedicated to isotopic separation and atomic enrichment. He walked the same paths as spies and physicists, under the eyes of Soviet generals and ghosts alike. Hundreds of Germans labored beneath him, their purpose clear: to unravel uranium, to separate what they could destroy from what they could endure. He received the Stalin Prize in 1951, a silent applause echoed behind iron doors. He stayed there for a decade. When he returned to the German Democratic Republic in 1955, he wore no chains. Instead, he was given a chair at the University of Leipzig and named chairman of the GDR's Physical Society, revered, respected, and never quite trusted. For how could a man who lived that long in the heart of secrets ever truly come back? Hertz died in East Berlin in 1975 at the age of 88. His grave in Ohlsdorf bears little ornamentation, no equations, no grand proclamations, just the name of a man who split atoms, served empires, and walked the edge's knife of science and state. But his story lingers, folded in the silence between electrons, humming in the cold corridors of memory. In Ohlsdorf, Gustav Hertz rests beneath the soil, yet in laboratories of nations and calculations of physicists, he's not at rest at all. In the shadowed hush of Ohlsdorf Cemetery and the Commonwealth plot, beneath the sky that forgets nothing, lies James Allen Ward, a name etched in courage, a memory scorched into the earth by flame and altitude. Born in New Zealand in 1919, Ward was a teacher by trade, not a soldier. But Ward doesn't wait for titles. He joined the Royal New Zealand Air Force with quiet resolve. By 1941, found himself in the belly of war-torn Europe, co-piloting a Wellington bomber through the night. It was during one such mission, on the 7th of July in 1941, that the darkness tried to claim him and his crew. A German night fighter struck, igniting a fire along the wing with smoke trailing their path. Their fate seemed certain, but Ward did the unthinkable. He crawled out of the aircraft at 13,000 feet, clinging to the wing-whipped skin of the bomber, and smothered the flames with a canvas cover. He kicked the handholds into the wing. He stared into the abyss, and it blinked first. For the staggering act of bravery, he was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest honor for gallantry in the face of the enemy. But war is a ravenous thing. 2 months later, he died on a bombing run over Hamburg. Ward's aircraft was shot from the sky. He died in the fire he once defied. He was only 22 years old. Now among the ivy and moss at Ohlsdorf, where so many stories lie buried in silence, Ward's grave endures. A single stone for a man who clung to the edge of the world to save others. Beneath the polished bronze of his naval honors and the swagger of legend lies the strange and haunting legacy of Felix von Luckner, a man once hailed as the Sea Devil, whose story drifts like a ghost ship through the blood-dark waters of the First World War. Born into nobility in Dresden in 1881, von Luckner rejected the gilded cage of aristocracy and vanished into the underbelly of the world's oceans. During the Great War, he took command of the SMS Seidler, a three-masted windjammer transformed into a predator cloaked in civility. With hidden cannons and a loyal crew, he prowled the seas not with brutality, but with unnerving grace. Over 225 days, von Luckner captured or destroyed 14 Allied ships, but always he claimed without unnecessary bloodshed. He offered his enemies food, safety, and sometimes even a joke. And behind the smiles, the ships burned. In 1917, the Seidler met its end on a reef near Mopalia Island. Shipwrecked but unyielding, von Luckner attempted an escape across the open sea, chasing salvation for his men. It failed. He was captured and imprisoned in New Zealand, a devil now in a cage. After the war, he toured the world not as a villain, but a spectacle, lecturing, charming, immortalizing as a gallant rogue. But the world had changed. In the shadow of the second, darker world, von Luckner rejected Nazism and allegedly helped a Jewish woman flee Germany. So whispers followed him of romanticizing the war and of stories varnished for applause. Felix von Luckner died in 1966, far from the battle-scarred ways that made him famous. But his ghost still sails in between, part hero, part illusion, and part of something else entirely. In Hamburg's Ohlsdorf Cemetery, his name is etched in stone. Yet it's the sea, not the earth, that truly holds him. Tucked within the hushed garden of women in Ohlsdorf Cemetery, a single memorial stone bears a name, Maria Price, but the ground beneath whispers of fire, betrayal, and courage unbroken. Born Maria Drew in the village of Bernsdorf in 1885, she came of age not in comfort but in resistance. By 19, she was already part of the 1918 Kiel Uprising, the lone woman on the Workers' and Soldiers' Council, a ghost among sailors and revolutionaries. As the Weimar years flickered and the storm of fascism gathered strength, Marie, now a communist, didn't bow, she dug in. When the Third Reich tightened its grip, Marie moved in the shadows, sheltering hunted souls and aiding the Red Orchestra, a resistance network whose name would be etched in the Gestapo dossiers and execution ledgers. With her sons Heinz and Victor, she hid communist agents that parachuted into East Prussia until the knock on the door came in 1942. The Gestapo dragged her into darkness. She was in prison, condemned, and yet death couldn't claim her. Bombs fell on Hamburg in 1943, and the prison walls cracked. In the chaos, she slipped through time's fingers, given leave by the falling regime, only to vanish underground once again. But fate wasn't finished. In 1944, she and Heinz were captured once more. The People's Court sentenced them to death. Heinz would not survive, executed in Brandenburg just weeks before the Reich's collapse. Marie, however, remained in the labyrinth. Delayed transports, shifting prisons, bureaucratic ruin. She survived not by miracle, but by the sheer unraveling of the world she had fought against. "I don't know why I survived," she once said. "I was transferred so many times until it was liberated by our enemies, who were, after all, our friends, our liberators." Marie Price lived to see the dawn. She died in 1983, her long life stitched with revolution, sorrow, and resilience. Her story, like so many others, is not written just in archives, but in the soil, beneath the trees of Ohlsdorf. Her stone rests in the spiral of remembrance, a grave among women of fire. Born in the twilight of the Russian Empire, Lev Luntz emerged from the soot-streaked alleys of St. Petersburg, with a pen in one hand and defiance in the other. A child of Jewish heritage, he was delicate in health, but fierce in intellect, mastering multiple languages and immersing himself in the literatures of Europe. By the age of 23, he had penned plays, screenplays, essays, and stories that danced on the edge of revolution and rebellion. As a founding member of the Serapian Brothers, a collective of writers who champion artistic freedom over political dogma, Luntz stood as a beacon against the encroaching shadows of censorship. His works such as Outside the Law and The City of Truth challenged society norms and delved into the tumultuous psyche of post-revolutionary Russia. Yet the very state he sought to critique turned its gaze upon him, and his creations were silenced for decades. In 1923, seeking respite from the physical ailments that plagued him, Luntz journeyed to Germany, but fate ever cruel claimed him in Hamburg a mere week after his 23rd birthday. His voice, once vibrant with dissent, was reduced to whispers, Among the exiled and forgotten, decades later the world would rediscover Lutz, unearthing his buried words and recognizing the brilliance that once threatened the very foundations of imposed conformity. His legacy, like a specter, lingers, reminding us that true art never dies. It waits, patient and persistent, to haunt the conscience of generations to come. Among the statues and shadows of Ohlsdorf Cemetery, whispers sometimes gather around a stone figure, known only by a chilling name, the cruel Countess. Her image, shared in fragments across social media, shows a woman carved in cold grace. Her face unreadable, her presence unsettling. No official record confirms her story, no inscription names her sins. And yet the caption beneath her photo dares to ask, does she still wander here? Her legacy etched not in words but in warning. Whether truth or tale, her myth lingers, modern born but ancient in tone. Beyond that one lone legend, Ohlsdorf breathes a quieter kind of haunting. One not born of specters but of a sorrow preserved in stone. In the Garden of the Women, memory blooms like the rhododendrons that surround it. Here rest Hamburg's forgotten heroines, among them Lavinia Schultz, a dancer and costume designer whose life ended by violence, yet whose spirit lives on in form and fabric. These graves are said to not be haunted, but stand like open questions carved in granite, reminding visitors that grief often outlives the ones who grieved. And then there's the children's graves, tiny headstones that feel and look illuminated at dusk. The soft glow catches on toys left behind, angels with broken wings and names barely begun. No ghost walks here, but those who pass through feel something, a hush, a heaviness, the kind that curls in the lungs that won't be named. It's not a haunting, it's something quieter, something sadder. In Ohlsdorf, not every ghost needs a name. Some are sculpted in silence, shaped by sorrow, and cast in the long shadows of grief. Beauty here wears a mask, and beneath it death quietly waits, cloaked in ivy and stone, reaching for the living in every season. It's a place that doesn't scream, it lingers seeping into visitors. It captures the senses in a strange and subtle way, leaving behind an ache in the chest and a chill in the bones, even for those who claim not to feel. Here, history doesn't rest, it blooms. Lives once lived rise like wildflowers between gravestones, revealing truths not always sought but always found. Ohlsdorf doesn't speak like other cemeteries, it sings low and deep, a requiem for the lost and an invitation for the living to wander inward. For some, it draws the curious, for others, the haunted, but for all, it opens a mirror. You may arrive unaware, but you won't leave unchanged, and you will return. Not out of obligation, but because something in you was stirred, something that remembers, something that truly never left. The grave grind for Ohlsdorf Cemetery was a galao from Haciendo Cafe. For more honorary grinds in the area, please visit the-grim.com. For now, we're closing the gate on Ohlsdorf Cemetery. We hope you enjoyed our dig into history. If you did, join us next week on the season finale of The Grim.